Time now for the Week 4 Over-Under Challenge. As always, this segment is presented by DraftKings. And also, as always, I am joined by Colin Cowherd to talk through some of our favorite player picks for this week's slate. By the way, while we did take a slight step back last week, Colin is still hitting well above 50% on the season so far with these picks. I also have to shout out my coworker and FantasyPros analyst, Andrew Erickson, who out of thousands of participants is number 1 on the leaderboard through 3 weeks with a ridiculous 24-5 record on his picks. So Colin and I are going to do our best to catch up to Erickson in that ridiculous record. Absolutely had to shout him out in his hot streak. As a reminder, everybody listening can play along with our over-under challenge and try to beat not only Colin and Erickson, but win some cool prizes as well by heading to fantasypros.com/challenge. All right, Colin, let's start as always with the quarterbacks, and we'll start with Jalen Hurts at Tampa Bay. Over 20 fantasy points per game on DraftKings so far this season. That's second best amongst fantasy quarterbacks. He's going up against the 28th ranked defense on DraftKings in Tampa Bay, but there's also question marks surrounding the health of Hurts' pass catchers. Do you think he can have another big week in Week 4?
I don't. He's missing Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. At least they're not practicing. This is also a team that has high-end tight ends and Saquon Barkley. I tend to think this is a game they're a bit beat up. They want to go to the ground, eat the clock, keep it conservative, pull out a win. This is what good teams do when they're banged up. San Francisco, the same thing. You want to get it. I mean, San Francisco had a game and lost it. You want to get in, get out. No special teams blunders. I think they control the ball on the ground. That's my takeaway on that.
The other quarterback I want to highlight is Kyler Murray going up against Washington. Kyler's just under 20 fantasy points per game on DraftKings this season, number 4 amongst the rankings. This Washington pass defense is porous. It has been shredded all season long. Are you expecting a big game from Kyler? Although his tight end also has some question marks as well with the concussion.
Yeah, McBride's great. I think he goes off. Washington on a short week. They can do all the tricks they want with Dan Quinn. This is a personnel issue on the back end. I wouldn't be surprised if they're in the playoff hunt. If they don't make a move at the trade deadline, they need some real help back there. And I mean, Detroit's a better team, ball controlled Kyler, so his numbers come down. That's not what we're looking at here. Washington can be an explosive team. They won't control the ball. Lots of possessions. Kyler he'll have a very big Sunday.
Let's actually stick with this game as we move into the wide receivers, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is also in this week's challenge. So kind of along those same lines, going against that same very terrible pass defense. He's averaging 24.7 fantasy points per game at home this season, which is where he is facing this Commanders defense. Do you think he has an explosive game?
I absolutely do. Again, often rookie players are better in comfort. A quarterback with time to throw, a wide receiver playing at home, a weaker secondary. I think he's a matchup issue that can be somewhat slowed against better secondaries. He's going to eat. I think he's going to have a big, big performance.
When thinking about Harrison having a big performance, are you worried that without McBride, if McBride is out due to the concussion protocol, that Harrison just gets all the defensive attention?
No, because I think they have an excellent run game. I also think Kyler Murray presents certain problems where you have to put a spy on him, which changes your personnel. So, and also Arizona's done a pretty good job this year to scheme up Harrison. Harrison's not a burner. He's not an over-the-top guy. There's so much cover 2 stuff now. Nobody's getting the cheap stuff. So I just think this is an offense that's flexible, that moves, that rolls out, and that allows receivers like Harrison to get more time as Kyler Murray evades a rush. So I think Kyler and Harrison have a big Sunday.
The other receiver that I wanted to highlight, Jamar Chase, going up against the Panthers. He, of course, just faced this Washington defense in Week 3 in that very exciting Monday night game. He had 32.8 fantasy points on DraftKings in that game, just 17.5 on the season, kind of a fringe top 10 fantasy receiver so far. Do you think that Week 3 breakout was more about this terrible Commanders defense that we keep shredding, or was it Chase kind of fully shaken off that rust from missing most of August, and now he's kind of all the way back to being this elite receiver?
Yeah, the latter. I think Jamar has a good Sunday. I also think when a team is struggling, you go to your stars. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are their stars. They have one elite pass rusher, but Cincinnati's going to have to win in shootouts. This is a team that's going to have to score 27 points to win. And so I would bet offensive players for Cincinnati all season long. Burrow was remarkable. Now, Jaden Daniels, because his team won and because he's a rookie, stole a lot of the headlines. But I think when teams are in crisis, they go to their strengths offensively. And I think Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are going to continue to put up big numbers.
Yeah, might not have thought this one was going to be a shootout until we saw Andy Dalton a week ago, and that offense obviously looking extremely different and much better without Bryce Young. So that one could end up being, especially if get that revenge game narrative from Dalton, that could definitely end up being a shootout. Like I think you're correct, most Bengals games will be this season. Let's look at our running back, Jordan Mason against New England. 18.8 fantasy points per game on DraftKings this season, just 10.8 last week against the Rams. He is a top 10 fantasy running back on the season. What do you expect out of Mason against the Patriots this week in a game where San Francisco is very heavily favored?
Yeah, you're heavily favored off a disappointing loss. You're missing multiple skill players. So New England's a team that can bring some pressure. I think this is the classic. We got to get our confidence back, but we have limited offensive players. They don't want to put Brock Purdy in the crosshairs, right? Like he is keeping them alive. Like he and Jennings are the offense. So, I think what's going to happen is a team like New England, Gerard Mayo in the Belichick book, they're going to take Jennings out because right now Brandon Ayuk's not doing much. So my take is the run game will be extensive. You're a favorite. Again, shorten the game. We're beat up. Let's get out of here as a big favorite. Not waste any time. Let's not get too cute. I do think they'll roll the coverage over somewhat on Ayuk, but often on Jennings. And I think Mason provides a good Sunday.
Obviously, it's often matchup, related, but with Christian McCaffrey going to Germany and dealing with this now, looking like an even more prolonged absence, do you think Jordan Mason will continue to provide production throughout the year, really, even beyond just this week?
Yeah, so I think San Francisco, I said this at the end of last season, I thought they peaked. I think they're old, brittle, and expensive. And I don't think this is serious enough to keep Christian McCaffrey out to Thanksgiving. But I wonder if you look at McCaffrey in Carolina after two big heavy usage seasons, season 3, he got hurt. He's had massive volume carries and touches the last 2 years, and he's hurt. I think San Francisco looks at this. There's only two teams in the league where it's Super Bowl win or bust, Kansas City and San Francisco. Getting to the NFC Championship, they have done that. So they are looking at McCaffrey as a Thanksgiving on player. And I think at this point with this franchise, that's appropriate. So I think Mason is a real player. This is not just stopgap. He's going to be a significant offensive outputter. And I think even when McCaffrey comes back, they'll slowly move him into the offense. I think this was going to be a tough year for Christian physically, and I think they're going to be very patient.
Let's wrap up with a tight end here. Kyle Pitts against the Saints. Just 8.2 fantasy points per game this season on DraftKings. That is good enough to be ranked 10th among tight ends because it's been a very poor season for tight ends across the league. He also did manage to snag a 50-yard catch last week against the Chiefs. That helped you win your same game parlay on DraftKings, Colin. Can Pitts help us out again this week against the Saints?
No, Atlanta's offensive line is beat up. Pitts is not a blocker. So I think when Atlanta's offensive line is healthy and they feel like Kirk has protection, they can let him loose. But right now, they'll probably use sets to give max protect to Kirk Cousins. And so my take is Kirk Cousins, until this offensive line gets healthy, Kyle Pitts will not get a ton of production. He's not really a blocker. He's kind of a finesse tight end who you could play outside. I thought he would become a better blocker, but the Saints, most teams that play Kirk Cousins are going to have a game plan, put heat on him. That was hard to do when Atlanta's O-line was healthy. It's one of the top 5 O-lines in the sport. Now it's banged up. It's not elite. So I think people are going to go after Kirk Cousins, forcing Atlanta to use blocking tight ends. So I don't think Pitts will be as productive.
Remember to head to fantasypros.com/challenge to play along all season long. Colin, we're gunning for that 24-5 record Erickson's got. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks, guys.